Welcome back to the Madison Advisory AI podcast. I'm your host, Amanda Verner Thompson, founder of Madison Advisory AI. This show brings together leaders across industries who are navigating what I call the new frontier, a world where technology, automation, and AI are accelerating decisions, but where judgment, trust, and experience matter more than ever. Today's conversation is about trusted advisory, what it really means, how it's changed over time, and why planning and education still matter more than products. My guest is Andy Turner, founder of Turner Financial, who has spent decades advising clients and supporting independent advisors through multiple market cycles. Andy recently made a thoughtful transition by aligning part of his business with a larger platform. Not for convenience, but for but to scale education, deepen advisor support, and stay true to client-first philosophy. In this episode, we talk about trust at scale, the danger of product-first thinking, lessons from 2008, and how advisors can navigate technology without losing the human element. Andy, welcome. I'm really looking forward to our conversation today.
Hi, Amanda. Thank you for having me.
Great. So during my brief introduction, I mentioned that you're at a transition point. Can you dive into what made this moment, the transition itself, and what made this moment the right inflection point for you?
This time last year, I realized that an awful lot was going on in our industry on two sides. You hit on a little bit about the tech part. What has happened on my recruiting, mentoring side of my business with my agents and advisors I work with, a lot of our shops have been bought out. They've been merged into bigger entities. I would say that most of that is not good because it's falling short for what advisors really need, which is some help and not just product driven, like you mentioned, more of a mentorship, more of a understanding of their
Hmm.
practice. And so after that 8-month process, I decided to merge that side of my book and business with Peak Pro Financial out of Denver. I'm about 45 days into that shift. And so far it has been very enlightening to some of the things they're doing from a technological standpoint, some of the things that they're doing from a planning standpoint, which really matters to me. Like you and I had spoken about in the past, the planning side of this business matters. And so that merge is ongoing. This will be the first time when something's sent out platform wise that talks about it, other than my individual conversations I've had with my advisors. But I'm very excited about what 2026 and beyond looks like.
You mentioned things were changing in the advisory space. I know they are on the technology front. Do you think they are education wise or product wise?
Yes, I say this all the time, Google is a wonderful thing and an awful thing all wrapped into one for our industry because there's just as much bad information as there is good information. And unfortunately, what's happened in a lot side of our business, a lot of advisors have gotten into what I call singular thinking, where they're very product driven and not necessarily planning driven. And what's happened over the last 12 to 15 months, and I kind of saw this coming, which was part of why I did what I did with my advisor side of my business, there has been more of a shift to discussed planning and understanding that I don't believe any product has been built to hurt someone's retirement. What I do believe, though, is certain products fit certain times based on where you're at in your career and in your what I call your accumulating phase of your retirement. And when you get within what we call the Goldilocks zone, that 5-year zone of maybe I'm about to think about retirement, maybe it's at 60, maybe it's at 65, maybe you're going to work till 70 because you like what you do. There is no vanilla folder. And so what we're trying to do is teach advisors, the one thing that really changed my mind about what we live in is the IMO, FMO side of the world on the marketing side. Those stand for independent
Hmm.
marketing organization, field marketing organization, and it's just based on size. Your IMOs are smaller, Your FMOs are bigger. They're doing a lot of premium. What has fallen short is the um, lack of explaining the planning side of this business. What they do now is they say, here's your best product, you know, and is that best for the client if the advisor hasn't asked the right questions? Do you really need income? Are you okay creating a taxable event? Maybe you've decided to retire early, say 62, and you're using your Social Security as a part of that income. Well, until you're 67, you got to be careful how much you're earning outside of your Social Security. So, are you going to have to pay some of that back? And if you're not paying attention to those levels, you could be hurting the client more just because you sold them a product versus an actual plan, if that makes sense.
That makes sense. And it seems like the holistic viewpoint is really where is your strong suit and has been Turner Financial's strong suit. How did you throughout your career learn or develop that as a strong trait of yours?
I'm very fortunate that I have some really good mentors in this game. My older brother being one of them. He's 21 years older than me. I was working for him when I was in high school. He doesn't like me sharing that because a lot of agents that I was talking to didn't realize how old I was at the time. I obviously wasn't teaching product. Most of what we were dealing with then was just me chasing paper as far as, contracting and insurance licenses, things like that. But what it taught me when I first got into this business, when I started, I had someone ride with me for 6 months. I set the appointments, he closed them, but I was there. And then once I got past that 6 months, he had to release me. He had to say, yeah, you can handle these now on your own. You'll obviously maybe run into a question or two. And that was the way people got trained, in the mid to late 90s and in the 80s for that matter, like when my brother got started in the early 80s. And now that's not the case. I talk to advisors all the time. Are like, oh, well, we did 6 months or 6 weeks of getting our licenses, but we didn't really do any sales training. We didn't do any tax planning. Go get to work. And
Right.
if they're lucky, they might have a mentor inside that company, but in a lot of cases, they don't. They're on their own. And so what I've tried to do is use that mentorship that I had and pay it forward, that I can show what I've done over the last 25 years, how I've handled my conversations with my personal clients on my personal side of my business, and try to share that knowledge. Because, like you said earlier, I do believe in the holistic approach that not everybody's retirement is a vanilla folder.
And when you say so you're trying to take on the mentorship role in general, do you think that's what's really missing today in the education piece is there aren't as many people taking on the role of a
I think that because of what I call conveyor belt ideas, where you have all these products coming and it's happening so fast, especially with technology and AI and everything that's going on now, there is a piece missing in understanding where those products fit. And that's the part that I'm trying to mentor, where I'm like, listen, here's your possibilities. I just had a really great call with an advisor at 1 o'clock today where he's like, man, I'm not sure. And I'm like, well, have you approached it like this, basically splitting it down, go a little further into the conversation. And I think sometimes that's scary for some advisors because they're scared that they're putting themselves into a situation in tough questions. But if they have a group like Peak, if they have someone like myself that is behind them, that has the expertise to say, hey, here's how you handle those questions, then they'll start to be able to be more of a total conversation about someone's retirement other than just being a piece.
right. And you mentioned the conveyor belt mentality. If our listeners are thinking about that and are in that mentality themselves, what's your best advice for how to step off of that conveyor belt?
I think it's really easy. One, in our world, it's really hard to talk about. People say it's morbid. I got to think about when I'm going to die. Like when you're selling life insurance. What they don't realize is it's a protection. And it's the same thing on the retirement side. Yeah, it might be scary. You might be in your mid 50s, early 60s, and you're thinking about, okay, when's the day I'm going to push the button and decide to retire? It is a scary thing to think about that you're going to hit these milestones. But the scarier thing is to walk into the room scattershotting it into the dark. And I think it's very simple for people to use the conveyor belt and say, oh, well, my friend has this product or my friend did this, not really realizing maybe why they made that choice versus sitting down with an actual financial planner, someone that has a plan in mind based on what their needs are. And if you can get ahead of it, if I can teach anything in this podcast, and whenever anybody has an opportunity to talk to me, is you have to be ahead of it. You mentioned the the 0809 situation. I have multiple stories of clients that couldn't retire when they wanted to because they got hit so hard in the '08 situation because it never comes back that fast. If you have a 30 or 40% drop in the market, it may take 6 or 7 years for you to break even. And if you're right in that situation of getting ready to retire, maybe that year or within days, then all of a sudden that market risk and what you lost in your retirement changes how much money you have access to. Because now you're going into your, you're using your retirement, you're not accumulating it. So if we'll just call it 5%, you're taking out of your retirement, but you're in the whole 40. Well, that means that you got to make 10 or plus to start getting back to even, which, like I said, is going to take you maybe 5, 6, 7 years, depending on how hard of a hit you got. And so being able to be ahead of it and being open to having conversations about understanding when those markers are going to hit and knowing that, no, I've got a plan in place and not necessarily being so market driven that it's so close to, oh, what's the market doing today? Well, that matters. But if you've got a plan in place, it's not the whole thing about where your money is. You've got some
Right.
of it in protected, you've got some of it in protected buckets. You'll hear people talk about bucket planning, quadrant, planning. Basically all they're doing is taking pieces. There's a lot of different wording to it. The goal is to make sure that you have a financial baseline that when you wake up in the morning can't go backwards. Now you may not be earning 15% on it. Maybe you're earning 3, maybe you're earning 5. And then you decide in your other buckets how aggressive you want to be. But every 5 years you get older, closer to retirement, let's say 50 north, you get to 50 and older, you need to take a look and tweak how much you have at danger versus how much you have protected, because an 0809 situation could bury you, and I saw it, I witnessed it.
Yeah, so it's really not a set it and forget it mentality coming into the market.
Right. Yes.
And is that also
Because
referencing
at some point you want to use that money unless you don't care and you're just using it and whatever's there is going to go to your heirs. But even then, why would you put it all at risk?
right. And is that what you were also referencing earlier in our conversation when you said everyone has their Goldilocks, I guess, time frame or moment? Can you expand upon that a little bit?
Yeah. So you want to do work early, but you definitely want to get involved 5 years before you retire. Because if you wait till, for instance, I just had a client call me last week that up and decided they're retiring next month. Now, luckily, we've done some planning, but they weren't supposed to retire for another 3 years. So I was like, whoa, this is a different conversation we're going to have. Like, okay, yes, you can do this, but this is going to change these numbers. This is what it's going to look like tax wise. Because what we had talked about a few years ago is they weren't going to retire till 68, and they've now decided to do it at 65. Great, but the plan has to change. Now, luckily for them, we spoke 3 years ago, and we're already starting to put some of these things into play. That 5 year window is important because where you have your money at risk, what is your plan for how you're going to generate income? Is it going to be Social Security driven, pension? Do you have a pension, which is falling off outside of most government employees? Some teachers, most people anymore don't have access to a pension. So it's going to be a combination of your IRA dollars and the money you've saved. and Social Security, what's that going to look like? And if you can get ahead of it inside that 5 year zone, it gives you a really good opportunity of where your money's protected and what you're going to use it for and how that's going to look from an income standpoint. Cause then you can start doing some income planning. Cause maybe you're used to making, and I'm using round numbers, maybe you're used to making 150K a year, but with what you have saved and what you're going to get from Social Security, maybe you're only going to make 85, maybe you're only going to make 100. And so,
Mhm.
can you throttle back your expenditures and change the way you live in retirement because you're not making as much money? I would love to tell everybody, oh, you're going to make as much or more, but it's just not reality.
Right. And so your ideal point of really starting to dive in and get things going is 5 years before retirement,
Yes.
knowing that your business plan in general is being the trusted advisor for your clients. Generally, when do you get how many years before that 5-year mark are you involved with the ongoing
Love to
relationship?
be way ahead of it, and have a 15-year run.
Mhm.
If you're getting ready to turn 50 to 55, that's when you really need to start paying attention to what you're doing. I can tell you that it doesn't matter how hard I beat that drum, and I know there's some other advisors out there because they're friends of mine that think the same way. It is really hard to get people to make that mental switch because they're working, maybe they're trying to finish their kids in college, trying to get them to say, hey, hold on, you're really aggressive over here. You might want to start throttling it back with some of this money. We're not telling you to completely get out of the market. That's silly, but you might want to make sure that you're not 100% in the market because the closer you get to retirement, the more money you have at risk. Maybe you don't have as much to play with for what your income's going to look like. So there's some tiers to that. So in reality, I would really love to talk to you after you turn 50 to at least start setting some of those parameters. But I know that most people really don't get to thinking about it until about 60. And so, if I can say anything also in this is that, there's no wrong time other than the longer you wait, the harder it is. It doesn't mean it can't be
Right.
done. It's just the numbers that I have to play with, what the income looks like. It's a lot harder to do it immediately, and say, okay, we're going to turn on this switch if you haven't done some things to get prepared for it.
Right. And that makes sense. And I think one when we spoke, and I think you alluded to it, is 2008 as well, is a great example of not having everything kind of in the right buckets, if you will, at a certain time in your life.
There were a lot of people that had to go into damage control. I tell this story a lot when I do my seminar. I have my one of my best friends, his father was a truck driver for Ford. And right before we went into 2008, he decided to retire. He had about $780,000 in his 401k. Had a grandchild coming, so he decided to go and see my friend's sister to go help her with the grandbaby coming in. And he said, hey, when I get back, I want to talk about protecting some of my money and what you can do for income. Well, we all know what happened during that time frame. He took a 47% hit in his portfolio in his 401k, basically over the course of almost 45 days. And he was out of town, wasn't paying attention to it, made a phone call to the HR person at that point. I'm sure I didn't ever ask, but I know it was probably someone that was monitoring it. I don't know if it was an advisor or not, but it had knocked him down to almost half of that. And instead of going into full retirement mode like he planned, he had to take a part-time job and, did some odds and ends jobs for cash to run on because it took him until about 215 to break back even as far as the market coming back. And then he died of a heart attack. And so all of that time frame, he from 68 to almost 74, by the time he got to 215 to when he had now got that money back because the market had started coming back because he had to leave it in the market to get those jumps. We couldn't take it all out and protect it. You gotta get back there again. Um, he never really got a chance to use those funds the way that he wanted to because he didn't. I was in his ear, but I get it. People are busy. They're working. They don't. but it taught me a very valuable lesson that I have never changed in anybody that I talk to. I tell that story because it's the truth. I lived it, I saw it, and he's one of millions of people that were right getting ready to retire during that time frame and then went, "Whoa, what do I do now?" Where
Yeah.
in 2000 or 2002, if they had made just some changes, I'm not saying you completely blow up everything. Let's start siphoning out some things and protecting some of your money. That conversation would have been different. He may have
Yeah.
taken a hit, but he wouldn't have taken the hit that he had because he was all in the market at the wrong time.
And I think that story is very relatable for all of us that lived through 2008. And you could see it's just holding off for the grandchild just those few months make a change the rest of your life. So I
If if he had come into the office the 2 months before he left and we moved some of that money and protected it, maybe he takes $100,000 hit, maybe 150. But he would have had guaranteed income coming in. He would have had some things going on that were protected. And unfortunately, that didn't take place. And I have met probably several hundred people since then that were, younger than that, going to be, 58, 60, and realized they had to push their retirement back. They couldn't retire at 65. They had to push it to 70 because their retirement accounts had to have that time to come back. And so there's a definite need for understanding that the planning needs to start sooner than later.
right. And as we look towards the next decade or so, I think near term, how do you think newer technology, implementation of AI will change your work in the advisory world?
Some of the things are going to be good because as far as, quantitative values and what they're going to look like as far as like, how they come up with indices and how things are credited is going to be so much quicker.
Hmm.
We're going to have knowledge of how markets are going, by second now, where they're going to say, oh, well, this is what's changing. And, the values and the illustrations that I'm seeing today because of AI is crazy how fast we can kick out this information. The disconnect is going to be AI can't have this conversation. They can have a conversation with you, but it's going to be, go get on a chat box. And I'm dealing with this right now because I'm waiting for a Christmas delivery. So it's why it's hot on my mind. Go get on a chat box and try to have a conversation with AI, and it's going to be very forced. They can funnel you into different things, but they can't have a conversation about the past other than numbers. They can kick out numbers, but they can't sit and say, oh, well, this client had this situation in '08.
Right.
So advisors are going to have to learn where they can use AI. Clients are going to have to realize that you can't rely on it 100% and figure out that medium point of someone you can trust that can still walk you through what products fit based on what you want your retirement to look like.
Mhm.
We're in a great industry because they can't run us out. Can they get rid of some jobs maybe in back office? Can they automate things and make things faster? 100%. But these conversations are still going to exist because there is a personable conversation that has to take place. I have to ask tough questions. Any of the advisors that I work with, what's your plan for retirement? Do you want a vacation? Do you want your house paid off? You know, do you want to live on the beach? Whatever the conversation is, then figure out, okay, here's the cash that you have at hand and where you can and can't do some of these things.
Right.
Sometimes it's a fun conversation. Sometimes I have to be the bearer of reality.
Mhm.
But that's why you lean on someone to take a look at it and try to walk you through that. And I think right now, technology wise, there are some wonderful things happening in our industry. And I think they're trying to figure out where those fit. But these conversations are never going to go away. I mean, you're always going to have the people are going to be like, well, I just want to plug in my information and tell me what to do.
Mhm.
Well, they're going to try to vanilla folder it. It's not going to work. Maybe
Yeah.
for 1 out of 100 people, where they're like, "Oh, well, here's what you should do with your money." if you're trying to really plan for retirement, is that what you want? You want handed a vanilla folder that everybody else is getting to because that's the only way the AI knows how to manipulate it? Or would you rather have a conversation with a financial advisor that can say, wait a minute, you need to tweak this a little bit here. Yes, I do use AI. They kick out my models for me. I can give you kind of an idea what your portfolio is going to look like if you do these certain things, but you're not going to want to rely on tech completely because you're not going to get all the answers.
Right, and I think sometimes it's about not all the answers. The other side of the coin is perhaps you're not asking the right questions, and that's where a trusted advisor does come in because you may not know what questions to even ask AI. You know,
No, I mean, if you sit and think about it, use WebMD, for instance. You and I spoke a little bit about
yeah,
WebMD when we spoke the first time. If you plug something into WebMD, it's going to give you scenarios of what you might have. Same thing here. If you're looking for life insurance, if you're looking for investment advice, it's going to give you some scenarios because the AI is going to say, oh, well, here's your scenarios. But there might be 10 of them. How is a person who doesn't know maybe anything about financial planning, if they haven't lived in my world, going to look at that and go, oh, well, I should do plan C because that's the best thing I've heard? Or should they sit and look at it and go, okay, wait a minute, this might be a little bit above my pay grade. I don't want to ruin my retirement. Maybe I should sit down with someone and have a conversation a little different and just see what that looks like.
exactly. I think I said on WebMD you have a paper cut or you have cancer,
Yes, you did say there's a gaming divide.
yeah,
You're not necessarily sure.
yeah. Exactly. To transition a little bit back to the beginning when we talked about your big transition, I know that was a very well thought out transition. It is a big decision to make. What was your vetting process like, and how did you ultimately come to that decision?
Man, I went in and out of 15 offices that are all larger players than I am. Some of them reached out to me because they found out that there was a possibility I was a free agent, so to speak. Um, Traveled all over the United States in an 8-month period. Met wonderful people. Not a single one of those offices are horrible. Um, but some things that I was looking for, Peak checked all the boxes. Some of them got halfway there, and I had one that I was vetting out that was close. It's just I think they're too big to fail, and I like the family atmosphere that Peak brings, the back office, they're sincere, and that's the way I've built my book. That's the way I've dealt with my advisors in the past is I really want it to be personal. I've had employees, I've got part-time marketers, I've had assistants, but ultimately they get to me when it becomes important enough. And I like the fact that Peak thinks the same way. We don't want they call themselves an advisor development firm. And that's what I love about what they're doing. They want to dig in to someone's practice and help them build and scale versus a lot of what I saw going in and out of other offices was the conveyor belt mentality. We've got the best products. You should do it this way. And I feel like that's starting to drop off. I think a lot of your advisors realize that they need to do better planning. They need to have, you've got 14,000 65-year olds turning 65 every day right now. We're at a peak as far as the baby boomer, what they call the baby boomer age. And all of those people are either in retirement or are looking at retirement. And hopefully, for the bulk of them, they're getting a chance to have these conversations with someone that's looking at it as a whole and not trying to pigeonhole them just into one product.
Right, and that makes a lot of sense that you went in that direction, given how much you value the trusted advisor as well as the developmental necessity of advisors in and of themselves, the educational piece, if you will. Is there anything else that you think our audience or listeners would really value in terms of your experience going through that process or a piece of advice that you would give to someone looking for a transitional moment in their firm?
Biggest thing you have to do, and I had some mentors help me with this. One of them happened to be Gabe, who's the CEO of Peak. Write down what's most important. Write it down and don't move from it. You're going to get sold. Obviously, dollar signs sometimes get involved, and people see dollar signs. They have a tendency to change the way they think about things. But if you stick to your core values of what you want that transition to look like, and it could be a career transition, it can be like what I'm doing, which merged a part of my business with another group. If you can stick to those core values and check off those boxes, does that mean that you're going to bat 1,000? And anybody in any set of business knows no one bats 1,000. If you get to 80 or 90%, you got a really good chance that it's going to work. And that's what I tried to stick to. If I can give any advice, I wrote those things down. I even added a few things as I kind of got into those conversations, like, maybe I need to pay attention to this. And that mattered to me, of sticking to that goal, that when I got to where I'm at now, that it was, nothing seamless. We're still in the process of shifting advisors and moving part of that book, but the goal of it didn't change as far as what my value was of how much I valued their business as me being a conduit for them to help them grow.
It's really important to hone in on what your core values are, what you really want from a transaction, and as much as you can, stay strong to that. So
Yes.
I'm glad you did that from this seat. So I think overall this has been a really thoughtful conversation, Andy. I appreciate it. When you're sitting there and you're thinking about the next stage of your career, what do you want to have the most impact on your advisors and the families that they serve?
A lot of what I said earlier, I'm hoping that I'm able to direct advisors in the right direction that's the best fit for their client. And then who knows what that's going to look like, because every conversation is different. I try really hard to stay on the cutting edge. It's part of the reason that I'm with Peak, that we're paying attention to what it looks like. There's a lot of money now that is going to be transitioning from qualified to non-qualified dollars. And how are you dealing with that? Everybody's hearing the Roth conversion is everywhere. Roth conversion, Roth conversion. Well, what does that mean? And to get there, what are you doing to get there? Because there's a lot of ways to peel that onion. And so each person should have a conversation with someone and not just go into it going, I'm going to do this, and then realize they got hit with a tax bill they weren't expecting. Or they realize, oh, well, I drew down too much of my liquid cash to go get this money over here tax free. There's a system to that, if that makes sense. And so I hope I can teach my advisors, and that's part of the reason I'm with Peak, of showing that there are alternatives to the Roth game that can help people in a way that I didn't even realize. I'm learning it every day. And if I can share any of that with my advisory group, is that I'm hoping that I can help them, which will ultimately help their clients.
And I think you've shared a lot with our listeners here today, so hopefully we're all learning a bit from the feedback you've given us, and I
I
really
hope
do
so.
appreciate it. For everyone that is listening, we will share Andy's information and how to contact him, if that's okay with you, Andy, in the
Mhm.
show notes.
Yes.
And I would like to thank everyone who is listening today, and we hope to have you back here next time. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Amanda.
Thanks.